Good morning. Thanksgiving is coming soon, right? We're in the final stretch before Thanksgiving arrives. And you know what that means, right? Thanksgiving is almost here. You know what that means. You know what's getting ready to happen, don't you? What's it mean? Yeah, that could happen. Now, here's what that means. Social media is about to blow up with pictures of food. That's what that means. That's what coming into Thanksgiving means. Pictures of food are about to cover all social media as if we don't know what a turkey and pumpkin pie look like, so you have to Instagram that junk. That's what's getting ready to happen come Thanksgiving. I don't know why people do this, like we don't know what that is, or why you need to feel like you need to brag about your food. Do I sound frustrated about this? So I was thinking about coming into Thanksgiving and all these pictures of food, and I got to thinking, you know what? We don't do that. Like at our family, we don't do that. And so I started scrolling back through pictures that my family have taken, kind of going through our iCloud picture sharing, right? And we do take pictures of our food. At least my wife and my daughter do. And what I've found in scrolling through those pictures is there are times where before I get to eat my hot food, I've got to pose with it. Or we have to stage it just right so it looks good on Facebook. And so I have to coordinate the placement of the food for the perfect pic. So I was kind of going through our pictures, and so I thought I'd show them to you what we do here. Oh, look, we're meal prepping this week. Like that's what this picture is. Here's OMG, guess where I am, Mom and Dad? Baskin Robbins, that'd be my, oh, look at that. Anybody know what that is? So I'm talking about thumbprints. If you were here a year ago, someone made thumbprints for all of us. Those are thumbprints. Got to take a picture of those and make those. It's sushi night. There's sushi. This, and evidently I do take some because I did take this one, I think. And hang on, go back because that is, yes. If that's what we were having for lunch, this sermon would be way shorter than it's gonna be. Cheesecake and steak, you can't go wrong with that. With the L8 one on the back. Here's before, after, right? These are pictures on my phone. There's our shrimp boil with our family, like back at Christmas, and then here. This is me about 30 minutes after we dropped my daughter off at college for her freshman year. This is yeah. So we take pictures of our food, and I'm mad that we do. But I thought I'd show you that we do. Anyway, now that I've gotten kind of all that off my chest and realized that I'm just as guilty as you, Thanksgiving's coming, and if you share pictures of your food on social media this Thanksgiving, I will harass you the whole weekend. Anyway, so we're starting a new series today called The Table, and the idea is the dinner table. And I thought it would be kind of appropriate as we're heading into Thanksgiving, and most of us, I would assume, will be sitting around the table with family or friends, gorging ourselves and taking pictures of our food as we do. I don't know if you know this, but Jesus loved to eat. Jesus ate. We see Jesus eating or sitting around a table often in scriptures. One commentator of the book of Luke said that Jesus was either going to a meal, eating a meal, or leaving a meal, it seems. And in scripture, Jesus tells us why he came to this earth. Like when he's having dinner with Zacchaeus, he shares with Zacchaeus in Luke 19 verse 10, he says, "For the Son of Man, Jesus, came to seek and save the lost." Like that's why Jesus came to this earth, to seek and save the lost. But Jesus also tells us how he came. So he came to seek and save the lost, but it says in Scripture, this is how he came. Luke 7:34, it says, "The Son of Man came eating and drinking." So like this is how he arrived, to join us in this, to eat with us, to sit with us around the dinner table, to have conversations with us. And so, like in Mark chapter 2, verse 16, it says, he did this so often, it says, when the teachers of the law who were Pharisees saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, why does he eat with those guys? Well, why is he always eating with them? So Jesus loved to eat. He loved to sit around the table with people. And it appears that he loved to eat, but if you know Jesus very well, if you've studied Jesus at all, we have to assume that as much as he loved to eat, while he was at the meal, the people who were at the table were more important than the meal. Like as much as he loved to eat, he loved the people more who were sitting around the table. Like if Jesus had an Instagram account, he might have pictures of food, but more, he'd for sure have pictures of those he was eating with and those he loved. Like Jesus enjoyed the company of people. He loved connecting and he loved the conversation. And what happens when we see Jesus sitting down with people for dinner, for those who were around the table, it becomes a moment that isn't just food for the body. Sitting with Jesus around the table, it wasn't just food for the body. He became food for their soul. And so the question today, at least in this new sermon series, the question today is, what if you could sit down with Jesus at the table? Like, what if you could have dinner with Jesus? What if for an evening you could gather around a meal, and after you've posted pictures of it, you could just sit and get to know Jesus? What if you had 2 hours and allowed Jesus just to pour into your soul and speak into your life? And so here's the question, that if you could do that, if you could sit around the dinner table with Jesus, what would he say to you? Not to us as a group, but if he sat down with you and looked you in the eye, what would he say to you? What would Jesus say? It would certainly depend on your circumstances and what you were going through, right? It would also depend on where you were at spiritually. Like in your spiritual maturity, I think depending on where you were at and how well you were following, and I think it would depend, depending on where you were at with that, he would have something to say. And so that's kind of where we want to go this morning. What would Jesus say to you if you were sitting with him at the dinner table? And he might say, let's look at this first example in Luke chapter 5, verses 27 through 32. Here's an example of Jesus sitting down with a bunch of guys, and here's how it plays out. It says, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth. And he says to Levi, "Follow me." Levi gets up and leaves everything behind and follows Jesus. Like he just drops it all to follow Jesus. Then it says, Levi, in excitement, held a great banquet for Jesus at his house. And a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with him. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law who belonged to their sect complained to Jesus' disciples. They asked, why do you and Jesus eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? Jesus overhears them asking his disciples that question, and Jesus answers them and says, it's because it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I've not come to call the righteous, but I've come to call sinners to repentance. This is one of my favorite stories. Like, here's a dinner party, a great banquet. Who throws the party? Levi, a tax collector who's just in the last few minutes dropped everything to follow Jesus. Now, here's what you need to know about tax collectors in that time. Like, tax collectors in that day were Jewish men, like they were from the nation of Israel, but Israel was under the control of Rome. Rome had conquered all the known world at that time. So Israel was controlled by Rome. Rome needed men within the nation of Israel to collect taxes from their own people in order to give them to Rome. So Levi was a Jewish man collecting taxes, collecting money from his own Jewish brothers, and that money's going to the enemy. And what Rome also gave Levi and other tax collectors permission to do is, and then take some off the top for yourself. Like, take some extra from your Jewish brothers for yourself, right? So here's this Jewish brother taking money from his Jewish friends to go to the enemy and even kind of stealing some for himself. And so people hated Levi, probably, because they hated tax collectors. The Jewish people thought tax collectors were like the scum of the earth and for sure knew that they were going to hell. The Jewish people, especially the Pharisees, just thought because we hate tax collectors so much, God must hate tax collectors. Jesus approaches Levi and says, I don't hate you. Matter of fact, I want you to follow me. Levi, in excitement and appreciation, says yes, and then throws this massive party for Jesus, and Levi then invites the entire Jewish IRS office, right? And they all show up. All the people that all the Jews hate are at this one party. The tax collectors and the rejects, and Jesus receives them, Jesus parties with them, Jesus connects with them, and outside the party are these super religious, self-righteous leaders. Like if the party were a table, and there probably was a table, but if the religious leaders were inside the party, at this table, on one end would be these really sinful guys, these cultural rejects and sinners. And on the other end of the table would be these super religious, self-righteous leaders. Two different groups of people at this party sitting at the table. And Jesus is kind of in the middle of them. I don't know if you know this, but here at Church of the Crossroads, we have former exotic dancers, former prostitutes. We have drug addicts addicted to prescription drugs and some who've been addicted to worse. We have sex addicts. We have people here who've been incarcerated for violent crimes and spent years in prison. We have people who've been heavily involved in the dark side of spirituality, tarot cards and crystal balls and fortune telling and Ouija boards. We have people in this place with very spiritually dark pasts. And some of them are still struggling to get out of that darkness. And we also have people here who are offended and scared and could never see themselves dining with those kind of people. We have people here who've come from a very clean, safe church background where there was no room for sin and there was no room for big sinners, like people who committed the biggies. Although probably at that church, there were people who committed the big sins, but they just did it in secret because they were afraid of what the church might do if they found out. So at this table, there are two different kinds of people. There's one table, two different kinds of people. And in this story, Jesus addresses them both. And the question you have to ask yourself is are you in either one of those groups? If you are in the first group, the tax collectors, the rejects, the socially marginalized, those who have a dark past, like if you are in that first group, if your life is a mess, if you're addicted, if you're in a dark place, if you're down and out or broken, if you've ever been called a screw up or a problem or worthless, this story, this moment around the table is good news for you. If Jesus sat down with you and looked you in the eye, what he'd say to you is this: I love you. I know all about your past. I know all about your sin. I know you're in a dark place. I love the real you, all of you. That's what he'd say. And don't act surprised that I love you. I made you. That's how well I know you. I know your hopes, I know your hurts, I know your heartaches, and I'm here to help. I also know your sin, I know all your dark secrets, but I still love you. Matter of fact, he'd be looking you in the eye and he'd say this: you are the reason that I'm here. You're the reason I showed up. I'm here to show you that I love you. I'm here to forgive you. I'm here to set you free. I'm here to make you right with God. I'm here to save you. That's why I'm here, to save you. And I think at the same time, Jesus would look you in the eye and he'd say, and because I love you, I'm calling you out of that life of sin, which really is no life at all. And I'm calling you into life with me, like follow me. I love you. Will you follow me? And here's the thing you need to know about Jesus. Jesus is a truth teller. Always a truth teller. Jesus cannot lie. He is truth. He is truth. And because he's truth, here's what you need to know about Jesus. Jesus will always say what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. Jesus will always say what you need to hear rather than what you want to hear. Love does that. Love tells the truth. And some of you need to hear Jesus say this morning. So on behalf of Jesus, let me just say it. As a church, we love you too, because Jesus loves you. We love you too. We think you're worth it. You're not too far gone. You're not too messed up for Jesus. We believe that fully. Jesus always says what we need to hear. I grew up close to my mom's side grandparents. Does that make sense? My maternal, is that right? Grandparents? Grandma Patty and Poppy is what we called them. And every Sunday after church, we would go to their house for dinner. I was in, elementary school, even middle school, high school, and we'd always eat big. And Grandma Patty after church would always have we'd sit around the table together to this big meal. And Poppy would always sit at the head of the table, which I don't know if you know this, but I just remembered this week. He loved to eat chicken gizzards. Anybody else? Anybody know someone who eats chicken gizzards? Yeah, I totally forgot about it. Not livers, gizzards. Look that up, take a picture of it, and post that on social media. Brag about eating that, So anyway, that's beside the point. But he loved to eat chicken gizzards, and so we'd sit down with him, and Poppy would sit at the head of the table. And when he wanted something, he wouldn't say a word; he would just point. And if we were in conversation and didn't see Poppy point, he would just keep pointing. And every now and then he might go, kind of tap the table to get your attention and point, which then would turn into a guessing game. Oh, you want the mashed potatoes, Poppy? Oh, the corn, the gizzard. And so it turned into this guessing game where we'd have to figure out what Poppy was pointing at, right? It got kind of weird. I remember asking my mom one time, actually more than one time, we're driving home from the house, and my mom and dad were kind of laughing about it, and I remember thinking and asking my mom, why does Poppy point rather than ask? And she'd say, I don't know, he's just always done that. And why doesn't Poppy just say something? Just ask. Would you pass the chicken gizzards, please? And my mom would say, I don't know. And so then I remember saying, well, why doesn't someone ask him? Why doesn't someone ask Poppy why he points rather than say something about it? And I remember Mom saying, well, no, we just let Poppy be Poppy. We don't ask, right? And here's getting older and looking back on that, I don't know, it's funny, it's weird. It was probably some sort of power play, right? Some sort of, I'm the head of the table, I'm the matriarch or the patriarch here. But for me as a kid looking back now, that was the elephant in the middle of the room, right? Like, anyone grow up in a home like that? And not just where your Poppy pointed and didn't ask, but there was something in your family's life or something that was going on in your home that you knew wasn't right or was weird or maybe even sinful, and you weren't allowed to ask about it. Anybody grew up? That's called dysfunction. And so everybody knew what the elephant in the middle of the room was, but nobody was allowed to say anything or question it because that's called dysfunction. You need to know this about Jesus. If you sit down at the table with Jesus, he will address the elephant in the middle of the room. He will address the elephant in the middle of your life, whatever it may be. That thing that you're choosing to avoid or not address. Like, Jesus will look you in the eye and he will wonder and he will question and he will ask because he loves you. Because he loves you. I think sitting at the table with Jesus, he would also say to you, follow me. And not on social media, but like, put your life under my authority. Surrender to me. Do what I ask. If you will do what I ask you to do, then I can be your doctor. Then I can help you get well. Then I can be your healer. Then I can lead you to freedom. If this is where you are, like, I hope you hear this from Jesus. I hope you not only hear it, but you can also feel it. He loves you even though maybe the super religious or the super self-righteous, even though other people who call themselves Christians haven't shown you love to this point, Jesus loves you. You're worth it to him. If you're in the second group, though, there's this group down here, the rejects, the tax collectors, the very sinful, and over here's the very righteous, the self-righteous, even the super righteous, the proud that they're righteous and good. And there's an elephant in the middle of the room, and Jesus he would address them. And if you're in this second group, the Christian that has been taught you cannot love those kind of people, you could not have dinner with that kind of person, you can't associate with them even. Like, if you've been taught the church isn't for sinners, you need to get yourself together before you get in here. If you've been taught that the church isn't for prostitutes and gamblers and addicts and people who are trouble, I think the first thing Jesus would say to you as you sit around the table is, that's bull. You've been taught a lie. I think Jesus would lovingly straighten you out and say, my friend, you've been taught a lie. And for some of you who are stubborn in your self-righteousness or stuck in your ways, I think he'd look you in the eye and he'd say, get off your high horse, stop singing Amazing Grace, and start showing Amazing Grace. And it might sound harsh coming from Jesus, but it would come from a place of love for you and love for those who you're trying to keep out of the church or out of heaven to some degree. And Jesus might say, look, you need me. You need my grace. You need my death on the cross. Stop trying to keep my grace from others and start giving it out. Start living it out. See these guys, like I think at the table he'd say, look, you guys, see these guys down here? I want you to get up, I want you to walk over, I want you to sit with them. See these guys down here? The next time you throw a party at your house, don't invite your super clean, super righteous Christian friends. Instead, invite your super messed up, incredibly jacked up coworkers and neighbors who need my love. You need to be ambassadors of my love to them. I think that's what Jesus would say. That's kind of what he's saying here. Now, are you feeling this? Like, Jesus calls it like he sees it. And sometimes it's comforting and inviting, and sometimes it's challenging and it gets in our personal space, but it's for our own good. He would look at us and he would say, I love you, and then he'd call us on the areas where we're weak. Dinner with Jesus would always be loaded with significance. And at times it would be uncomfortable. It would be conversations that would be full of grace and truth. Let me run with this just for a little bit because I want to share another story of Jesus having dinner. I was just kind of dreaming this week as I wrote this down. Let's say, here, let me paint the vibe for you, okay? You're sitting at dinner with Jesus, and it's a relaxed feel, right? There's lots of food, and there are lots of laughs, and maybe there's some, I don't know, Coldplay or Blake Shelton playing in the background on the stereo, and you chat for a while about whatever. Like, you chat for a while with Jesus about just normal life stuff, like your kids and how they're driving you crazy. Or you chat about fishing. Or you chat about how bad Duke beat Kentucky in basketball. And I think Jesus would chime in and he'd go, what do you think about that Zion Williamson kid? Yeah, he's good. And Jesus would go, yeah, I know, I made him. I created that kid. Yeah. And then Jesus, I think, would lean in at some point, and he'd drop this next question, and it would be a little loaded. And some of us are in a place in our walk with Jesus where we need to be asked this question by Jesus again. I think Jesus would say, I love you and you're worth it to me. Here's my question for you. Do you love me? Do you still want to follow me? Am I worth it to you? There's another story where Jesus, he's actually resurrected. He's walked out of the grave, and he's kind of revealed himself to his disciples, and he's on the beach with his disciples, and they have actually fish for what we think is breakfast. And one of his disciples, after they were done eating, was there. His name was Peter. And if you know the story of Peter, when Jesus gets arrested, Peter is with Jesus when Jesus gets arrested. And when Jesus gets arrested and goes to trial, Peter is kind of on the outskirts, hanging out in the shadows. And 3 times somebody recognizes Peter, and they say, "Aren't you the guy who was with Jesus?" And 3 times Peter says, "No, that wasn't me." So Peter, after Jesus' resurrection, is walking with Jesus on the beach. So you got to imagine the shame and guilt that Peter's feeling. Here he is again with Jesus, the one he denied, rejected kind of 3 times in that moment. Here's the story. It says, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," Peter said, "you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Then feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Then take care of my sheep." And then a 3rd time he said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Now this time Peter was hurt because Jesus had asked him for a 3rd time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Then feed my sheep." Now it's interesting that Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And now here is Jesus coming back or talking to Jesus, and he asks Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" And as embarrassing and as shameful as Peter feels, what Jesus is doing here is he's reinstating Peter. Like he's showing grace and he's redeeming Peter. "Peter, am I worth it to you? Do you love me?" And Peter says, "Yes." And then Jesus says, "Well, if you do, then your love will result in action." What kind of action? It will result in you loving and serving God's people. For some of us here this morning, we've been in a church a long time. Maybe been in a church that just as long as you showed up on Sunday, you're good. No need to do much else, right? Jesus, for you, might lean into you at the table and say, "If you love me, you'll help people. You'll serve people. Your love will take on hands and feet. It'll make a difference in the lives of others. It'll serve these broken, hurting." Right? Jesus might lean into the table and say, "If you love me, make an effort to inspire people to come to me." Here's another story of Jesus at a meal, last one, John 13, and it's a story that we'll circle back to here in just a couple weeks. But part of the story is this: the evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal. Jesus did, took off his outer clothing, he wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. And then in verse 12, it goes on to say, when he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place, and then he teaches them. He questions them around the table, and then he teaches them. He says, "Do you understand what I've done for you? You call me teacher, and you call me Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. And if I am your leader, if I'm your teacher and your Lord, now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I've set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." I think for me, as I was studying through and thinking through all of this week, Jesus, if we were to sit with him face to face, is always going to lay down truth to us. What do I need to hear today? What maybe have I heard lately from Jesus, or I've felt like I need to do this, I ought to do this, I read this, I heard that sermon a couple weeks ago and I've been thinking about doing this, but I've been putting it off. I've been saying, I'll do it later for another time, or no, you're not, I've been ignoring what you've heard Jesus saying to you. He's calling us to do something. He's calling us to make changes in our lives. He's calling us to, what is it that we need to be, what would he be saying to us? And I hope as a church, we are the kind of people who want to hear him say it. We want to hear truth. I don't want to be blind to my weaknesses. I don't want to be blind to my sin. I want Jesus to reveal to me where it is I'm weak and where it is I sin so that I can grow, so that he can change me. I hope we're the kind of people who value that kind of truth. Show me Jesus. Teach me Jesus. Challenge me Jesus. Grow me Jesus. And when he does teach us or show us, we embrace it. Like we embrace him and we embrace what he's taught us. Jesus, what do I need to learn? What should I be doing now? Jesus says to some of us, if you love me, you'll serve one another in the way that I've served you. You'll do this part. You'll do your part in this church that you've been attending. For some of us, he'll say, if you love me, you'll read about me. You'll study me so that you can become more like me. For some of us, he might say, if you love me, you'll talk to me. You'll pray to me. Because listen, when you pray, I listen to your prayers. I love it when you talk to me and pray to me. For some of you, he might say, if you love me, you'll give a meal to the hungry. You'll give a job to the unemployed. You'll mow the lawn for a widow. You'll encourage the discouraged. To some of you, he might call out the elephant in the middle of the room and say, you need to give, you need to tithe, you need to become more generous. To some, he might say, you need to work with the kids, you need to rock the babies, you need to serve. What is it he's saying to you that maybe you have been ignoring or saying you'll do later and trying to delay? For some of you, he might just say, trust me. If you trust me, you'll do what I say. A friend of mine, actually a brother of ours that goes here, has been in a job that's just been pretty, I'm trying to keep it clean. It's been a cruddy job, been treated poorly, and he's one of the leaders in this job for months, for a year, just been treated poorly, not communicated too well, it's just been a bad situation. And so for the last 6 months, he's been looking for a job to no avail. Been applying, been talking to people. He's been to numerous interviews. And we've had lunch. We've gone fishing together, just kind of talk through this. And one of the things all of us kept encouraging him to do, and he knew this, he stayed with it, is whatever goes down, however it goes down, even if you don't like what's happening right now, you need to be a man of integrity and character and be obedient to how Christ would handle this. And he did. He did for 6 months, just miserable, but trying to stay obedient, trying to stay above reproach and stay out of the mess. And this past week, he got laid off. They're shutting down his office. He knew it was coming. And 2 hours later, he got a phone call with another job offer. Because it was, and I think for some of us, Jesus is saying, trust me, hang in there, stay obedient, even though life isn't going your way. Trust me, I've got you. I'm bigger than this. I'm bigger than your problems. What would Jesus say to you? What do you need to hear? What are you hearing that honestly you're ignoring? Jesus is saying to you, do this, and every week you ignore it. Every week you think, good idea, but not for me. Every week you tell Jesus, I'll do that later, and he's calling you to act on it now. What is that? If Jesus were at the table with you, looking you in the eye, could you say those things to him while looking him in the eye? Or when he says, follow me, would you drop everything like Levi did and get after it? Let's pray.